But what about the timing? For more on this, let's bring in Jamil Jaffer, founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. He's also a former associate White House counsel to President George W. Bush and former counsel to the Assistant Attorney General, I should say, for national security at the Department of Justice. So you have been at the highest levels of the U.S. government. Just give us your assessment of what you think this balloon was doing, Jamil.
Well, look, John, I think that, as you know, nation states conduct surveillance of one another all the time. So it's not unusual. What's unusual here is that they got caught doing it and that the U.S. has been tracking this balloon for a while. Interesting revelation for the Defense Department that we've seen these balloons before over U.S. territory, haven't done anything about them. I think part of the reason we took action this time was it was so obvious. The public now knows about it. And so it was important that we took action and showed the Chinese that we're not going to tolerate this kind of violation of our airspace. So good on the administration for ultimately, it took them a while, but ultimately getting to the point of taking action, taking this balloon down. Yeah,
the president says that he ordered the balloon to be shot down on Wednesday whenever the Pentagon deemed it was safe to do so. Wednesday. But they had been tracking it for 4 days before that. It was first entering U.S. airspace on the 28th of January, literally 1 week ago. It seems like somebody was asleep at the switch here.
It does seem odd, John, that it did traverse over the Aleutian Islands, part of U.S. territory, and then ultimately over Canada, where we could have taken action with our allies. We ultimately let it get over the continental United States. Then the president gave the order, and ultimately the Defense Department carried it out. You know, they did scramble fighter jets over Billings, Montana, did impose a ground stop there. So surprised they didn't take it down there. There was some claim that perhaps there was concern about damage to folks on the ground or to buildings. You know, we'll see what ultimately we're able to gather. It having been taken down over the ocean now will make it somewhat more difficult to gather up that material and figure out what payload that balloon was carrying.
Right, because the missile that hit it, as our Pentagon correspondent suggests, it seemed to hit the electronics package, and everybody that I've talked to who knows anything about aircraft and radar say that makes sense because the balloon itself is kind of a stealth thing. A missile isn't going to lock onto the balloon. It's going to lock onto maybe that electronics package, and that's been blown to smithereens now.
Yeah, you know, John, that's a good question. You know, the AIM-9X Sidewinder missile does have a proximity fuse they can deploy it with. They could also have used a non-explosive fuse. It does appear in the videos we're seeing that there was something of an explosion, but not a particularly large one. So you might wonder whether they took out part of the package and may be able to capture some part of it. We do see some debris falling there that does appear to be, at least in some part, still put together. So we may still be able to get something off of that, but unclear what we will get. Ultimately, you may remember, John, back in 2001, the Chinese forced down one of our EP-3 planes, held American airmen and airwomen hostage for 10 days, and took all the electronics off that package and learned a lot about our capabilities back in that era. So obviously troubling what they did back then.
Yeah, it's, you know, this thing apparently had a solar array on it. And then as you look at the explosion, you see those reflective pieces fluttering to Earth. I'm guessing that those are mostly the solar panels, and whatever electronic equipment, you know, surveillance equipment this thing had to have on board would be fairly small. And that is going to be tougher to find, having splashed down in the ocean.
That's exactly right. In an ideal world, you get that whole intelligence package. You understand what their optic capabilities are, what their electronic communication interception capabilities are, and maybe even some of the data they had stored on there. Presumably it's encrypted, but if you can decrypt it, you know what they're collecting exactly from the United States over our continental land of the United States.
Jamil Jaffer, the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. Jamil, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, John.